So it's not like one morning women and men, denizens of contemporary global society, just suddenly got out of bed one day and decided they were going to be busy getting on and reinventing their lives, as if spontaneously. Part of my argument is that reinvention is actually anchored in quite broad institutional and structural contexts, and globalization is absolutely core to understanding why that's the case. We live in a world today where there's endless corporate downsizings, just-in-time deliveries, global offshorings, global outsourcings, multiple careers, short-term contracts, and this is increasingly the situation that women and men find themselves in these early decades of the 21st century. So the argument against that global backdrop is that what we've seen is women and men increasingly scrambling to adjust, to be able to demonstrate to others and to themselves that they're capable, of pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps and getting on with the task of recalibrating, restructuring, reorganizing, and reinventing both their personal and professional lives. There's been a really big debate, I think, over the last few years against the backdrop of some of the forces I talked about earlier, in terms of whether globalization might have in some sense reached the end of the road. Certainly there's been no end of diagnoses that, with things such as Make America Great Again and the whole rise of a kind of takeoff of sort of narrow nationalisms throughout the world, that globalization has run into trouble or that globalization has reached the end of the road. That argument was that, the era of peak globalization has come to an end. I think that view is actually incorrect. That view can only be maintained if you hold to a very narrow economic understanding of what globalization is. Globalization is not only about moving goods around the world, it's actually also about the flow of information, ideas, cultures, and communications around the world. And thankfully, against the backdrop of what's happened throughout 2020 with the pandemic, the COVID-19, thankfully we've seen that globalization in terms of communication, culture, identities and ideas, that actually can't be quarantined. What we've actually seen throughout 2020 is a kind of turbocharging of many global networks. So my argument is that no, in terms of understanding these contrasting forces of globalization and anti-globalization, that globalization itself has a good distance to travel, and that in itself is continuing to have really big impacts in how we should think about reinvention in terms of our lives and the way that we live our lives today.